I'm sure more than one of you watching right now have seen a bike with a checkered past advertised for sale and thought, well, that looks like a good deal. I bet I could fix that bike up and maybe sell it for a quick profit. That's what attracted me to this 2009 Yamaha FZ6R. Now, I usually don't go in for bikes with a small displacement like this, but it was local, had a clean BC title, despite being laid down. The bike had been sitting for several years according to the seller, and I figured at the price, what's the worst I could do? Obviously, the goal is to come out ahead of the game with a tidy little profit and unite a new rider with bike to live happily ever after.
Oh my goodness gracious.
If that isn't in the cards, maybe a track bike. Now, the FZ6R would make a great bike to run on a track day and then put away and not really have to think about till the next time you wanted to go out again. Potentially, the bike could also be the starting point of a custom build, like a cafe racer or some sort of dual sport crossover that would be maybe featured in the next Mad Max movie. But when you look at buying a crashed motorcycle, you have to be prepared for the worst case scenario. That worst case? Spending long nights cannibalizing the bike and selling it off piece by piece on eBay. This all considered, I arranged to see the bike and buy it. Within a few minutes of the transaction, we were headed back home, the Yami on the road again. My new bike and I were traveling down the highway for the first time together. Well, for now, we would need my truck to facilitate this since there was no safe way to ride the bike yet, at least according to the seller. Speaking of transporting motorcycles, one of the common questions I get asked is how exactly do you tie down a street bike in a truck or a trailer? So for posterity and educational purposes, so here's a brief explanation on how to strap down your bike properly. I'll make a YouTube short out of this video as well, so it'll always be there as a quick reference. So when I transport a bike, I use a set of these, sometimes referred to as soft ties or motorcycle ties. I found that they save a whole lot of grief and anguish when it comes to attaching your tie-down straps. Ideally as well, I don't like using ratchet straps if I can avoid it, simply because a ratchet strap can put a lot of pressure on this front end and suck that down, and if you have any weakness at all in your fork seals, you're going to find out in short order. If you use a ratchet strap, it can push fluid out of those seals pretty quickly. Now in this case, the fork seals I know are blown on this bike. It really didn't respond well to being strapped down. It just sucked all the way in. So we're going ahead and use some ratchet straps. If you do use ratchet straps, which I do on occasion, don't get me wrong, you just want to be careful that you don't ratchet it down too far. In other words, that you're not putting too much strain on your motorcycle when you've got it loaded into your truck. Otherwise, you're looking at a fork seal replacement and fluid flush in your very near future. So when it comes to attaching the motorcycle straps or soft ties, there's a few places that you can attach these motorcycle ties. If you have a clearance issue with your fairing, and this is something that you may see if you're transporting a cruiser bike, something with a wide fairing, you can even go to the grips, and typically is one of the widest parts of the bike, and you can go ahead and run off the grip. Now just be careful you don't put too much pressure on the throttle side where you could possibly damage your throttle housing. So just be conscious of that. But this is a really good place. On the grip, there's no way that that's going to slide off. The other area that we can go ahead and attach our soft tie is to the top of the tree. In other words, where the handlebars mount to the bike. And then we would connect the tie down to the loop down there. The most common area that I attach this is on the bottom rung of the fork trees. So basically you'll wrap this around the area between the top of the fork tree and the bottom one, and run this through like so, and then pull it down. Now the only thing you got to watch when you're using this method or attaching here is that you're not going to put any tension or damage potentially any lines like your brake lines, your throttle cables, clutch cables, those types of things. Make sure they're not running up against the side of the fork so that you know, potentially squeeze and rupture them The reason I like to run my soft tie or motorcycle tie on the bottom rung of the fork tree is that it puts this in a really good location. In other words, it typically is not going to interfere on the frame and is not going to interfere on the fairing. It doesn't cause any additional damage to the fairing to run it here. It also makes it low enough that it's easy to find and grab with our ratchet strap. So now we're ready to strap this bike down. Which side do you start on? Well, you're going to start on the left side and go ahead and start putting some tension on the bike over there. Now the other question, and what you see a lot of guys make a mistake on, is the kickstand. Should the kickstand be down or should it be up when you're transporting the motorcycle? Well, the reality is that it depends a little bit on your bike. If you have a motorcycle where the kickstand is mounted to the engine casing, in other words, there's a tab cast in the aluminum of the engine that the kickstand mounts to. A common manufacturer that uses this method is Ducati. If you have a bike like that, never, ever, ever transport your bike with the kickstand down. Don't put any pressure on that kickstand other than holding your bike up. Don't pivot on the kickstand. Don't drag it around on the kickstand. You run the risk of breaking that tab off of your engine. Because that engine case is aluminum, putting that tab back on is neither easy or inexpensive. Those two things kind of go hand in hand. So to start with, we're just going to put some tension on the left side of the bike. And all I'm doing here is getting it a little bit of tension in there. Not a whole lot. Now we're going to move to the other side, and as we ratchet the other side, what you'll see is the bike start to swing more vertical, more up and down, and the weight should come off the kickstand and allow us to swing it back up. Now this particular bike doesn't have a kickstand that's mounted to the engine. There's a piece of the frame here that the kickstand's mounted to. So I could leave it in the down position. It does add a little more stability when it comes to going over rough terrain. At least the bike isn't going to fall over on to the left side. The other thing that's not a bad idea is to put the bike in gear when you've got it up here and got it secure. It just makes sure that when you're unstrapping the bike, it doesn't roll away on you off the back of the truck if, say, you were parked on a hill. So because of the unique situation with the front forks on this bike and the fact that they're not really creating any resistance on the front end, if I just hook the hook in this setup that I have on the soft tie, I kind of run out of ratchet room. In other words, the strap where it's seamed together here runs into the ratchet part and it doesn't ratchet anymore. So what I'm doing here is looping this through like so, and then running the hook back to my tie down. So now we're ready to ratchet on this side of the bike. So the goal here is to get the bike upright and make sure that that front tire is all the way pressed against the front of the truck box. So now that the bike is vertical, we've got tension on both straps, we can go ahead and raise the kickstand. So if you're at all concerned about the security of the bike, or you're going over some particularly rough terrain, you can add one more strap around the rear wheel. What I'm going to do here is take a tie down from the rear ties on the truck, take my strap, loop it around the wheel like that, and then run it to the other tie down point. So now I can just go ahead and put some tension on this rear wheel. Just make sure you're not going to damage any components on the wheel. Don't run any hooks close to the wheel or anything else like that. So now the bike is really secure. It can't go anywhere. If one of the ties were to come loose or break, you've got two other ones holding the bike in place. So the final point I want to make when you transport a bike
is what to do with the leftover strap, the part that would otherwise be flying loose, and sometimes you see that flying loose down the highway. The best thing to do with it is just make a simple hitch knot out of here, which you wrap it around and then bring your loop up underneath and then pull to tighten. That way it's not going to be flapping out behind you, causing a distraction or getting caught on anything. I see this a lot when guys transport stuff on trailers, and then this strap actually winds up getting caught underneath the trailer wheel and causing additional grief. So actually breaking the strap or tearing it from whatever it is they're strapping down. So that's how I strap down a motorcycle. If you have any additional tips you want to share with the community, go ahead and put them in the comment section. Now it's time to get this POS unloaded and start the real hard work.
When you're ready to unstrap your bike, start by putting the kickstand back down and then loosening the right strap first. This way the bike's weight is transferred securely back onto the kickstand. One of the hassles in unloading a bike yourself is to control it when it's coming down the ramp. I always move my bike from the left side, where the kickstand is, and this makes it difficult to reach the brake lever at the moment gravity is accelerating the bike down the ramp. My technique is to put the bike in gear and use the clutch to slow the roll. With the bike in gear, you can actually stop mid-ramp when releasing the clutch. This can allow you to step down or just check the wheel alignment on the ramp, as I'm doing here. Before I agreed to purchase the bike, I made a quick check of the local market. For this bike, the closest comparable was $3,900. The bike was a couple years newer and has a few less kilometers than the one I bought, so to make this all work, my total price after the repairs would have to be less than $3,900. Now that the bike is home, I needed to go over it and see what's all wrong with it. First, I checked the oil to make sure it actually had some and determined what condition it was in. The bike had oil, or something that looked like oil in it, and the color was off, reminiscent of transmission fluid. When an engine sits for long periods, the oil can start to varnish like gasoline. A telltale sign the oil is old is a red tint to it. Now, there's nothing to be overly concerned with other than it's a clear indication that the oil needed to be changed. With oil in the engine and the battery charged up, I hit the starter to see if the bike ran. Surprisingly, with 3-year-old fuel in the tank, it fired right up. Now, you could smell the varnish in the tank and in the exhaust. I would not have thought the bike would have fired up this well on the first try, so kudos to Yamaha. Now that it was running, I had to at least take it for a little ride to give it a check over and get a feel for it. A quick run down the street there. Of course, putting safety first, I grabbed my helmet, just in case a wheel fell off or the brakes didn't work. The first ride over, it was time to get busy stripping down the bike and looking for hidden damage, adding up the estimate. It's not uncommon to find odd bits in someone else's old bike. I found some interesting attempts at a number of fixes and modifications, but the only real oddity besides the obvious damage to the bike was this hot lead from the positive cable of the battery. It looks like it was for a battery tender, but there was just one wire tucked into the harness ties. The wire didn't go anywhere and it wasn't connected to anything, so whatever it was no longer needed. I'm curious why it wasn't just removed. Potentially it could have ground out and caused a big issue. Luckily the wire had a fuse link in it and the fuse was removed, but I'll never know what the power was actually intended for from the previous owner. Plastic body panels off, I could start cleaning the dirt left on the bike from the previous decade. The fork seals had both failed, and the front forks, brakes, and wheel were all covered in fork oil. The rear wheel has more encrusted chain lube on it than the chain itself, and the spider webs and egg sacs needed to be cleaned out. Despite the environmentally friendly degreaser's claim of being a powerful and safer choice, it became clear that I would have to break out the big gun on this job. With the bike now a bit cleaner and in a more visible state, I started to run through some more checks. The other area of concern for the bike was difficulty shifting, reported by the previous owner. I noticed when I went to look at the bike, the clutch was brutally out of adjustment, and I had tightened it up prior to my short ride. Now, I know these transmissions in the FZ are a bit notchy, but for good measure, I took the clutch apart to inspect the plates and the shift shaft for damage or broken springs. There are 3 springs that can fail on the shaft that rotate the shift drum in the transmission. Satisfied that there isn't a failure in the shaft or the springs, the culprit being the friction discs, which are a 0.5 millimeter under spec.
Oh, that's nasty.
The varnished oil is also a bit tacky, and after spraying some penetrating fluid on the shift shaft mechanism, the action did improve. At this stage, here's what I estimate I would need and how it adds up. The bike itself I purchased for $1,200. Provincial tax and title transfer were another $175. The fork seals and bushings would be $90, fork oil another $20. Up front, the tire is cupped and worn out. While the rear is okay, a new Bridgestone up front is $197. The passenger pillion seat has a tear in it. I can buy a new seat cover and slap this on both seats for $150. Engine oil plus new oil, air filters, and spark plugs for a bit of a tune-up will set me back $190. New EBC friction discs, pressure plate springs, and a new OEM gasket are $135. A new O-ring chain and sprockets will set me back $162. The scratched up oil pump cover and a new gasket from Yamaha are $125. A replacement rear brake pedal is $75 also from Yamaha. At this point, not including my labor, I'm at $2,519 for a fully functional, albeit naked bike. Now the expensive parts. To replace the broken nose cowling and side cowlings with OEM Yamaha fairings would be $1,500. If I can even get the parts, since they could be back ordered to 2025. If I wanted to replace the fuel tank because of this dent, which is located on a curved bit in the tank and may be near impossible to remove otherwise, a new painted tank from Yamaha would be $850. If I go with the OEM fairings and tank, we would be well above our investment limit at almost $5,000. The only answer then is to look to the far east for some ABS plastic replacements. These I can buy for only $800, which is a complete set painted. Although these fairings are not perfect, I have installed a couple of sets of these replica knockoffs previously, so I know what to expect and what I'm getting into. Now, provided I just touch up the tank or find some other way to distract from the dent and save the nearly $1,000 in parts Yamaha replacement would cost, this would put the project final budget at around $3,319. Now, if I can sell the bike for $3,900, this would make a $581 profit. Not huge, but it's probably safer than Bitcoin, and we will have some fun along the way. But what are your thoughts? Should I pull the trigger on the rest of the resto parts? Should I throw budget and good sense to the wind and create a one-off custom for Hollywood North? Put your comments in below and I guarantee I'll read them. If you want to find out what happens next to the bike, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications to Rod Rides and Wrenches. And until next time, be sure to ride safe.